All right. Good afternoon, Ryan. How are you doing today, sir?
What's happening, Mike? Happy Friday.
Yes, sir. You too. Friday with some good weather going on. Thankfully, it's nice and cool for now. It's supposed to be hot next week.
Yeah, for sure. We got that glimpse of fall for a minute where it cooled down and then it kind of came back and it's given us a little last swing at some heat. So I
Yep.
kind of like it. It's nice.
Yeah. Welcome to the desert, right?
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. So the question I know that we get or got all week this week is, what does the Fed rate change mean? And there's a ton of confusion about that every single time it comes up. So let's jump into that. So what exactly is the Fed rate change?
Yeah. So, the feds basically are coming out trying to change the borrowing cost,
Mm-hmm.
the overnight exchange rate, essentially, the borrowing costs for the banks. And if they can do that, then what happens is that eventually will translate into higher borrowing costs for businesses and consumers. The idea behind it is that if you make things a little bit more expensive, it will slow the take rate for
Yeah.
a business or for the consumer. And so, one way to combat inflation is to make the cost to borrow a lot more expensive.
Mhm.
We feel it as consumers and we
Yep.
say, you know what, had enough, I'm not going out to eat as much, I'm not buying that extra TV that I don't need. We kind of start curbing our spending. Inflation starts to kind of scale back a little bit.
Yeah.
That's the overall intent with these hikes. They're aggressive. In the past, we see these things at like 0.25% a pop. We've had 1%, we've had 3/4 on this last meeting that they had 0.75%. And really the tone is that, hey, we're not stopping until we get inflation back down. We want to be under 2%. That's kind of the overall goal right now.
Yeah. Okay. So the cost of money to borrow becomes more expensive, and essentially that the idea is to slow down consumer spending.
Exactly. And there's a lot of confusion around that in related to specifically mortgage rates. I mean, we're in the real estate business, so we can talk a little bit about consumer spending and how it impacts things, but we could also talk about mortgage too. And I think
Yep.
it'd be good to kind of clear the air on that because I think there's a lot of confusion related to Fed rate hikes and what it translates to in real world kind of impact for people.
For sure. And so that's always the first thing that comes up is like, the Fed is spiking the rates, so interest rates are automatically increased, right?
Yeah. And we got calls literally all week. And it's like, hey, I'm going to look at a house on, Saturday. Can I
Mhm.
lock my loan today? Because I want to get ahead of the Fed rate hike.
Yeah.
They're worried about that part of it.
Yeah.
And the reality is that mortgage rates are really tied to different securities.
Mhm.
Those securities that they're tied to, typically mortgage-backed securities, et cetera, those are very sensitive to inflation.
Yeah.
So in a weird way, when the Fed rate, they come in and they crank up the Fed funds rate and they make it a lot more expensive to borrow in efforts to curb inflation, they're actually doing the mortgage rate environment a favor. They're trying to bring inflation down, which will improve mortgage rates. Mortgage rates are incredibly high compared to last year. If we do a
Yep.
comparison, they're much higher than they were last year. And the reason why is because inflation is much, much higher than it was last year. And if you kind of think about it like from an investor standpoint, if you have a bond, which is where the mortgage rates are derived from, and that
Mhm.
bond's going to pay you back a 3% yield, let's say.
Yep.
And you give them, in this case, hundreds of millions of dollars or even billions of dollars to invest. But let's just say it's URI, we're giving them $1,000.
Yep.
We're going to get 3% on our money. And we find out that inflation's at 8, 9%. It's trending in these upper tiers.
Yeah.
Well, now that money, even though it's guaranteed, I'm going to get my 3. Well, technically, I lose money next year, the year after, and I'm guaranteeing that I can't touch that money for 30 years. I'm doing a 30-year bond at that point.
Yeah.
The reason why they're more expensive, rates have to come up because the return is less and less with inflation kind of eroding that.
Yeah.
Same concept that you have or should have as a homeowner when you look at your mortgage debt.
Mhm.
You're getting it in today's dollars and it will be eventually cheaper 20, 30 years from now. That money that it essentially is it's being eroded over time.
For sure.
So inflation is actually really good for our debts.
Mhm.
It's bad for mortgage rates, and it's bad for things like consumer credit. So Credit cards, they all just went up 0.75%.
Yep.
Auto loans are going to feel pressure to be moved a little higher. Home equity line of credit. If you have a home equity line of credit, your home equity line just went up 0.75%. So to give you kind of an idea on that, if you had a $50,000 home equity line of credit, this little change right here translates into the 0.75%. It's about $31 in additional interest for that month. So it's not going to kill most people, but it definitely, you feel it. Your payment just went up $31, literally for no reason, but that's the impact that you're going to feel as a consumer.
Well, and that's the one time. Like, how many times has the Fed raised rates over the year, right? And so that $31 is probably closer to 300 over the year.
Yeah, it's stacked a few times for sure. And we're not over on this. I mean, there's going to be some more hikes that come our way. We'll probably see a little bit of easing come November. So the next Fed meeting in November, we think that's the tipping point. That's where rates start to kind of go the other direction, possibly.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons why is that in November, the October inflation reading is released in November. It's always kind of trailing.
Yeah.
And in November, if you kind of look at the inflationary chart, I don't have it pulled up here to show you, but there's a spike. So spike is in October. That's the high point.
Yep.
And we look at that, and they always do a year over year comparison. And so they'll go, oh, well, that little spike that we had in October, the difference between what we have now and what it was a year ago isn't as drastic.
Yeah.
And so it's going to look like, oh, magically inflation's coming down. We've done our job. We're saving 1%. We brought it down 2%, whatever the number is. A portion of that is just the compare. They're going to do a compare year over year. And October's the high point. Right now, we're in a low point. So the compare that we're doing right now actually looks worse than it probably really is.
Yeah.
But that doesn't bode well for mortgage rates. So in November, when they get that compare from October, it should drive things down a little bit. Maybe not right away, but it'll have a little bit of relief here in November.
We'll see. Unless they change their mind again, right? So that's a good. Well, so what's the good part of the Fed rate change?
The good part about it is to bring overall inflation down. So in a way, we all get upset when our home equity line of credit goes up, or our credit card interest goes up, or our car payment borrowing costs are more expensive, or if I'm trying to buy a new house or buy my first house, our borrow rate on a mortgage today is a lot more expensive. So that bothers all of us. But there's a whole other side of it, all the ancillary costs. Every time we go out to eat, when we go to the grocery store, when we go to the gas station, all of those things have a component of inflation in them. And so if we can get that number to come down, we should see our overall spend in all those other buckets start to come down as well. And so it's good that they're being aggressive with it. They kind of tiptoe the line a little bit. They're just flirty with it, which is what happened last year.
Yeah.
Essentially, we're going to raise it 1/4. We think it's going to be transitory. It's not going to last.
Yeah.
Then the tune kind of started changing. Well, apparently, there's a lot more money in the system, and we didn't realize what we were doing. All of a sudden now, it's going to stick around a little while. It's persistent. And now it's persistent to a level where they have to get incredibly aggressive with it to really take action. Yeah. So it's kind of like if you were scolding your kid. If your kid does something wrong, you're like, hey, don't do that, buddy. Not a good idea.
Yeah.
You can do that so often, but if they just keep doing it, and eventually you're like, don't ever do that again. Like, you're yelling at them. Like, so that's what we're at now. The Feds are yelling at inflation. Like, hey, we got to get this thing down. Like, get it to pay attention. Let's bring it back down. Let's take control of the situation. But there's cost to that. And so some of the casualties, you look at inflation's one area you're trying to save. On the other hand is the job market.
Yeah.
If you get aggressive on slowing down the economy and you do it too fast, guess what's at risk? It's the job market.
Yeah.
It turns into recession. Recessions mean, now businesses can't hire. They got to lay some people off because the consumer spending just rapidly decreased because we got too aggressive over here trying to fight inflation. So there's a really careful balance that they have to play. And unfortunately, one of them's a casualty. You can't really save both.
Yeah.
You got to look and go, all right, which one do we want to save? We want to save the job market?
Yeah.
Well, if we do, we're gonna have to probably print more money, because if we save the job market, inflation's not coming down anytime soon, which means the borrowing costs for everybody, everything in life is more expensive.
Yeah.
We want to bring that down for the masses. We're going to have to lose some casualties over here in the job market. And that's the biggest challenge that they run into. And unfortunately, I think the only way to do it's like a teeter-totter.
Mhm.
You have to put a little bit more weight on one of these, it's going to pop one up. There's no way you're going to totally balance it.
Yeah.
It's really, really hard to do. So we move into recession, we lose some jobs. It's kind of the byproduct of this move. Interest rates on mortgages start to come down, inflation comes down, we start to feel it as long as we have employment. If we don't have employment, recessions are terrible because we're really going to feel it. If we have employment,
Yeah.
our cost of everything else in life start to come down. We start to feel a little bit better.
For sure. And unfortunately, as humans, right? Like, with the boiling frog analogy, like they can't just kind of slide in and just, kind of try to correct it without teeter-tottering the whole system, because I don't think people pay attention enough. And so they have to overdo it, and the government always does. Like, look back, they'll overdo it and then they'll kind of back off. So they have to inflict a lot of pain, and then everybody pays attention, and then they'll let it slowly return back to normal. Because, like you said, last year they kind of flirted with it and it came up a bit, and I don't think anybody slowed down on spending money. I mean,
no,
just look around. Like, go to the grocery store, go anywhere you go outside of your house. I don't see any kind of slowing down. And then, like, talk to like the dealerships with cars. There's still waiting lists to get cars. Like, I don't know the last time I heard somebody say that, like, hey, I went to buy a car, a new car or used, and went to the dealer and just like, I picked it up today. Like, so I don't think spending has slowed down. And unfortunately, we're going to be in for a roller coaster ride because they're going to have to inflict a whole lot of pain before we pay attention.
Yeah, you have kind of a weird thing that happened too, and part of it's psychological, and it's that during the whole COVID slowdown, chip shortage, supply chain issue, whatever you want to call it, maybe it's a combination of all of those events.
Yeah.
You had various things in life, depending on whatever you were buying, that were unavailable for an extended period of time. So, for an example, let's say you're buying a car, buy the car today, go down the checklist of all the features, and they go, oh, by the way, your car's here. It just doesn't have 9 of those features that you really want. Well, we don't know when you're going to get it. So consumer kind of goes without. The alternative was just not to release the car at all, which was what happened for a little while. Other items like certain parts, certain food items at one point or another over the last couple of years were kind of unavailable, or they were harder to get. The toilet paper run, right? So little things that kind of slow up. Well, what happens is we see that and we feel the inability to get it.
Yeah.
It's natural. Everybody has it. And so then when it becomes available again, we kind of rush out in droves to go and pick it up. And so we want it more. And it doesn't matter if it costs more later when they do it. It's the fact that you needed it one day, it wasn't there. Now it's back in somewhat limited supply at a higher price. We just jump on it and try to get it. So if you combine that with a whole ton of money that got pumped into the system to kind of keep everything all propped up, there's a lot more ease of money, access to money than there was in the past. And so with that, it makes that move a lot easier, which is one of the reasons why we have the inflation numbers that we do. And in some sectors, I mean, they're talking, stuff in the 8s. Some sectors are way into like they're 20+% inflated. Some of them are 50% inflated. There's some segments of the world that are much, much higher from an inflationary standpoint than others. So CPI, that is really what the Feds kind of pay attention to. Some would say that's probably a very conservative number, at 8.41%.
For sure.
And many would argue that it's probably double that is the overall inflation.
For sure. And so going back real quick on the, the takeaway and the built up demand, right? Like we saw that in lockdown where, people couldn't go out. They couldn't, go to restaurants. They couldn't go on vacation. And so their spending habits changed a lot, right? And I think part of that, led into the auto market. Like, hey, I'm not wasting money every Friday night going out. Now I can afford a new car or a new truck or whatever, right? And on top of that, they started printing money and sending everybody checks, and now they had more money than they would have, and their spending was down. And so the price index went up, and then we ran into supply issues. Cost went up, right? And then But now I think people are back to adjusting, and they're going out again. Like, so like all of the restaurants are just slammed all of the time, right? And people aren't receiving the extra money, or not as many people, I should say, are receiving extra money. And the costs of business haven't gone down because of the jobs, having to entice people to come back to work. It's a whole interesting situation right now, and people were funny.
There's a little bit of a cycle. So you can see it right now with like jobs. If you didn't have a job, you're going out in the job market, you want to try to go, work at, let's call it Panda Express, right? Just fast food, kind of normal, everyday kind of employee, so to speak, non professional, right? Not like a skilled profession. So you go to work there, and the job postings are most people would consider incredibly high, maybe $18 up to, I've seen up to $24, $25 an hour to try to work at some of these places. It's really good wages when you kind of look at it. Perks and benefits are really trying to pull people in, because for a while there, they couldn't get anybody to come and work, and they had this massive demand. And so it was really, tough for the employees that were there. So the employer is going to overhire. Demand's going to really curb as the costs start to increase. So then they're gonna hire and fire. So they bring people on, they go, oh my gosh, we either have two choices to increase our price, but we don't have enough people in the door to do that. We gotta bring our prices down, or attract people, or cut our costs. So the most expensive piece of the majority of the businesses out there is
labor,
skilled labor. And so those start to kind of get cut. Those cuts fuel the unemployment field, and that bucket starts to fill up a little bit. That's kind of that teeter-totter effect that we were talking to earlier. Now, the consumer, in the consumer's mindset, the majority of us come from a place where, last couple of years, there was either we were out of work and now we're back to work. So we kind of had that pent up, like, oh man, finally there's some relief, I need to go spend. Or everything was fine, and stuff was scarce. And so again, that kind of pulls at your wallet as well, and you want to spend. That eventually will slow, but it won't slow until the majority of people, not everybody, but the majority of the people will overspend. And so what happens is they put stuff on a credit card with the intent to pay it off every month, but then they go, oh shoot, we put it on like 4 or 5 cards, didn't really keep track like we normally would or should. We don't have enough for it. We're carrying a balance. And that balance turns into a smaller balance, then a larger balance, then eventually becomes too heavy to handle. Those start to stack. New credit card gets implemented to balance transfer all the old credit card. You know the game. All of a sudden now the person with one credit card has 4 or 5. They're all maxed, and they have no other choice other than to file a bankruptcy. So if we kind of look at like a sort of a doomsday prediction, it would really be that. It would be if the consumer doesn't change habit early, then they will continue to kind of feed this spending habit. They're going to do it in an unhealthy way, get themselves into a pinch, try to debt consolidate, kick the can down the road a little bit, and eventually go into BK. Now, God forbid they lose a job somewhere in between there, because that'll accelerate the whole process. And that's the concern is, that do we have kind of a run on bankruptcies? Do we see those like really, really drastically increase? They could, especially in a recession like that, because so there will be some job loss, and the folks that do have the job loss aren't really predicting they're going to have one. And so they're not being maybe as cautious. So, I think that leads us into some best practices that we can kind of teach people, what to do. We know this is sort of coming. What do you do as a household to prepare for it, right? I mean, that's going to be critical, I think, for your success.
And then another thing you said, maybe the job loss coming that they don't foresee. I remember last time, 2007, 8, 9 in there, when credit card companies started just closing accounts. Like, hey, Ryan's pretty high risk, and that balance is an acceptable loss amount to us right now. So we're going to kill that account, maybe eat that loss, but prevent a larger loss because jobs and whatever. And so people's safety nets, or the credit cards that they use as safety nets, they need to so best practices need to realize that those could disappear also, and don't count on debt to be able to save you for sure.
Yeah, so that's a really good point. We haven't seen the closing of the card yet, but I do remember that in the past that people would have, 10 grand available on a credit card and all of a sudden it's cut down to whatever their current balance is. So they
Yeah.
had no more available funds. We haven't seen that yet. Could it happen? Absolutely. And I think to your point, when we talk about preparing for some of this stuff, we always want to prepare for the worst. But I think some people make the mistake of saying, well, I got this credit card and that one, and this other one over here, and they all have a little bit of room on them. So I really don't need to have much in the way of savings, because if I run into a pinch, I'll just go to the card and I'll pull that cap or do the draw against it, right? Pull the capital out and I'll live off of that.
Mm-hmm.
Don't do that.
No.
Don't rely on the debt to save you. Save yourself by getting that savings kind of set aside if you can. So assuming that somebody's in a really good spot, they've got, I think baby step number one with Dave Ramsey, right, is to set a certain amount of money aside.
$1,000.
$1,000. I mean, it doesn't sound like a lot, but some people don't have it. And so if that's where you're at, I mean, definitely start there. Start 1,000. I would really recommend going to 6 months worth of expenses. Mm-hmm. If you don't know your expenses, that would be put in front of the 6 month, figure out what the expenses actually are. Get a line of sight on how much actually goes out the door every month for everything. 6 months of that goes away. After that, then start to aggressively attack all the stuff you don't need, the credit card debt, et cetera.
Yeah.
But 6 months gives somebody a long time to kind of get back on their feet, get established in the job place, get their first checks, and kind of get back into rhythm.
For sure. A friend of mine I was talking to a couple of weeks ago was talking about basically preparing, right, for what could come. And they had gone through their family budget and they were looking at what their expenses were, and one of their credit cards had gotten a little bit higher than they were comfortable with. And I was really impressed with this person when they said it, because it wasn't even like they were just word vomiting on me this thing, which is totally fine because obviously we help people with their finances all the time. But they were saying that the credit card had gotten a little high, and that what they did was they went in and looked at their subscriptions, their Netflix and like all of that stuff, and they closed down several subscriptions in order to be able to accelerate their credit card payment. And like, my whole heart got happy when I heard them say that, because they did it on their own, whether it was they've heard us talk about it before or we've had that conversation before. I was super impressed with that individual that they did that on their own. And I think more people, back to what we were saying, like, how do you prepare for this? Like, it's an impending doom. Like, there's going to be a recession. Hopefully it's a short-lived one, right? And like the average recession length, if I'm remembering correctly, is only like 18 months.
It's about 2 years. Yeah.
Yep. So, which can be a very long time, right? I mean, the time is what the time is, but when people are in duress, that could feel like a very long time. So, get ahead of it, like you said. And one of the Ramsey baby steps is get the 6 months reserves put in. But that comes after you start to tackle your debt and you do the debt snowball. And for the people that don't know what that means, is you go after your smallest, let's say credit card, and you pay that thing off, and you take whatever your monthly payment on that was, and you go after your next smallest debt and you apply that. So you're not necessarily saving any money yet. Your spend is going to be the same, but you're using that to attack the debts and get rid of that. And then you go into putting your 6 months away.
Yeah, your spend is exactly the same until the debt's exhausted. Yep. So you don't pocket that savings, you just push it up to the next debt. And one thing that you mentioned is the lowest balance. Mm-hmm. So you didn't say the highest interest rate.
Yeah, not the highest interest rate, whatever your lowest balance is. So you can take that minimum, and now they call it the snowball, and it's because you take that, you add it to, and it gets bigger. Your monthly spend that you can use to attack debt gets bigger and bigger with each account that gets paid off. Yeah. And your primary residence is not part of that. That's a later step. Like right now, it's just cars, credit cards, student loans, things like that. Any other revolving debt that you may have.
Yeah, one kind of alteration to that could be worth considering is if you had an installment, like an auto loan, a personal loan, just some kind of an installment loan that is almost at the end, right? Let's say you owe $2,500, but your payment's $400.
Yeah.
Let's knock that one out. So the $400 frees up, then go and start chipping away at the Macy's credit card and the Lowe's credit card and all that fun stuff, right? So, if for the most part you're going to go the lowest possible balance, but if 400 at Lowe's, like I'd rather you just kind of get rid of that $400 payment for sure, just to free up a little extra cash.
Yep.
And start to accelerate the entire amount. Because then you start really, like when you do this the right way, we've done it several times with people. Some of that credit card you start seeing $800 and $1,000 payments on it monthly, and it chips away really, really fast.
Oh yeah.
And it's really nice when people get in a habit of doing it. It might be 6 months, might be a year down the road, and you check in on them and they're so excited. It becomes a habit. Like they're so excited to check their statement. They used to be scared of their statement, but they're excited to check it. They're like, man, that thing got chunked down a ton. Oh, it went down by this much. And you can see that they feel like they're actually making traction. So it's really cool. At the beginning, it's a little slow. It's like, a fitness journey. Go to the gym for 45 minutes, come back, take a look at yourself. You're like, don't look that much different. But a couple of months later, if you're consistent with it, I'm starting to see a change. Like, all right, this is good. So same thing with your spending.
For sure. All right. So anything else on preparing for the recession coming in or the next, Fed rate change, things like that?
I think that just the number one thing, watch your spending. I would say most people, 9 out of 10 people, don't actually know how much they spend every month. They might think they do. They might say, oh, I got a car payment's $500. I got my mortgage is $2,000. They just kind of throw out some numbers and they add them all up, but they don't know what they're spending at the grocery store on average. They don't know how much the gas prices are at average or the, other
Starbucks,
utility costs and things like that. I mean, it starts to add up. And then there's all the little miscellaneous stuff that you just kind of spend money on. You're like, well, that was kind of a one-time thing. Except if you do a look back over the last 6 months, you did it 10 times.
Yeah.
It's not a one-time thing. Right. So those are things that you have to kind of gain awareness around. I would say for somebody, they really got to get clear on what goes out. Then just like your friends did, eliminate some stuff you don't actually need. Are you paying for a subscription of something that you've used once in the last 3 months? Get rid of that thing. You don't need it. You sign up later if you want to.
Yeah.
Cut the stuff that doesn't need to be there. Trim the fat. Get lean. Save. If you don't have the savings already, really once you have line of sight on what goes out, then you start looking at what's coming in. So what are my income? What's that going to look like? How much can I actively stash away and set a goal and stick to it? Make the first goal, like within the first 30 days of doing the plan, how much can you save? And then go to 3 months, then go to 6 months, then go to a year. You don't need to stack a gigantic goal in front of you that seems daunting. It's like climbing Mount Everest from day one. Do little ones that you can kind of gain some momentum on and then kind of keep at it. But we know this stuff is kind of headed our way. We know that it's going to get a little bit tighter out there and it's going to be uncomfortable for some people. And if you're taking these measures now ahead of it, you'll be fine. You'll be totally fine. In fact, you might even be in a good place to take advantage of opportunity, which a whole nother conversation. When recessions hit, guess what happens when spending slows at various places? What happens to their stock? It goes the other way. It goes down. It's a great buying opportunity. It's a great time to supercharge your retirement plan or your IRA or whatever you want to put your money. You can make that money back really quickly in these rough times. And you can't really do that if you're stacked and loaded with a bunch of debt, or you just don't have the savings, or you don't have line of sight on what goes out anyways.
No, for sure. You got to prepare for that opportunity, right? Another funny thing is like with people, like, when they start to save the money and they get up to the 6 month mark, right? If they have to borrow against that because something happens, right? They borrow against their emergency fund. They mentally, like, they have to get back to that mark no matter what. And if they're ever lower than that, they feel sick, right? Like they're just so stressed out about it. And, they think the world is ending because they now have less than 6 months worth of reserves. But a year ago, they didn't have $1,000 set aside. So it's good for them to train their brains in that way as well. And then again, like you said, if you get lean right now, we take all these steps and all these measures and we build all these securities in place because we think that recession is coming and it doesn't come. you're not going to be mad. Like you don't lose. Now you just, your budget is leaner and you've got more cash set aside. And if any opportunities arise that you want to take advantage of, you can. You've put yourself in that position, which is a good progressive, thing to do, or an offensive thing to do. But right now we're saying, hey, let's do that to play defense. Like, let's get ready for any storm that may be coming. And if it doesn't come, cool. You still have all that money. You're still good to go.
Yeah, when times are really good and abundant, people don't take the minute to kind of do a timeout and really kind of take a deep dive at what goes out. They just don't do it. When things are really tight, they do.
They know exactly what goes out.
Yeah. And so we're kind of in between these two places where, we had a place of abundance. We're leaving essentially, and we're moving into a place of potential scarcity. So in the middle there, in the transition, just don't get too deep into this environment. Don't let 6 months go by before you figure out how much goes out the door. I would challenge you, it's September right now, headed into the holidays.
Get ahead of Christmas.
The stores think it's Christmas already. They already got that stuff out. And we've skipped a couple of holidays already. So as we go into that mindset, and we think forward with things like Christmas, if you don't have line of sight on that stuff, what happens Christmas time? You just sort of buy, and you literally have no idea if you can even afford to buy these things in the first place. You just sort of do it and put it on credit card. And then January comes around and February comes around. It's tax time. Get the loan application. Somebody now wants to move up or they want to buy a house, and they're going, oh, my credit cards aren't normally like that, but Christmas.
Yeah, the holiday
hangover. And the credit
Yeah.
score is impacted. Why is the credit score impacted? Because they just maxed out their credit cards from the month prior. So we're here in September, at the end of September, essentially. We can make these changes really now and better prepare ourselves so we don't have that whole, next 3, 4, 5 month event that is typical around this time of year.
For sure. And just get ahead of it. Like you said, don't wait 6 months. Don't wait 2 months. You should probably go home and do this today. So
absolutely.
Anyway, all right. Anything else we need to be paying attention to around the Fed changes, or anything that we know of that's looming off in the distance?
I think Fed changes, just don't let it scare you too much. It seems really heavy. We did get kind of a wild swing with interest rates. They went the other direction. So Fed's kind of, raising rates and essentially bringing down inflation over time. It's not doing a lot right now. We're not seeing those numbers really change. And that's the reason why the interest rates are really not starting to fall at the pace in which we would expect, because they're like, hey, you guys are getting aggressive and it's not doing anything. So they're like, until it starts doing something, we're staying put or we're going the other direction. And so we've seen rates kind of continue to go up a little bit. But again, we don't think that this is going to be something that sticks forever. I don't think we're going to have 10% interest rates at some point down the road. I really do think we'll come back down. A lot of the forecasts for 2023, somewhere in the mid fours, depending on who you're listening to. It could be Fannie Mae, it could be the MBA, it could be the National Association of Realtors. They're all predicting something kind of mid fours.
Yeah.
And so we think we'll probably hit that. They've been wrong before, but we do think we'll start to feel that, especially as we see the effects of the Fed rate hikes.
For sure. I want to go back to something that you said with, they've raised the rates and it hasn't had the impact that they wanted to, so they're going to continue to raise the rates. Let's go back and take that and unpack with the number of homes selling and home prices and how that hasn't come down enough, right? Like there hasn't been a big enough change. The market, all the people are like, the market's going to crash. It hasn't. Our interest rates have literally doubled. It hasn't crashed. And there's not enough sign of the train slowing down that the Feds are continuing to raise the rates.
Yeah, I think as relates to real estate, if we want to talk about, why is that not slowing? We are seeing some price reductions. We're seeing concessions. Those are more willing sellers. Those are people that have made a commitment maybe already. I just talked to one last night before I left the office who is selling a house. They got an offer about $40K low. This is a house in the 800s. So 5% off essentially. They have to sell. They have, I think, like October 15th is their deadline to have their house in escrow, or they're going to lose their opportunity with the new construction builder that they're working with right now.
Yeah.
So they've already made a commitment. So now they have a timeline.
Mhm.
Now, those that don't have a timeline will probably stay put for a little bit. So there is a little bit of the rate lock effect that happens, which, if you're sitting at 2.75 and you're like, well, I owe 300 grand on my house, it's worth 6, and I could potentially move up to my dream home at 850 or 9,
Mhm.
and you're faced with something that starts with a 6 on your new interest rate,
Mhm.
your payment's quite a bit higher.
Yeah.
And you have to consider that. And then some people will move on it and some people won't. It just depends totally on their situation, right? What
Yeah.
the motivation is. If that family who's considering that move is splitting at the seams, or the job that they're relocating to is requiring that move, they're going to make the move no matter what. It doesn't matter what the rate is.
Yeah.
If it's just for pure leisure, like that sounds like a nice place to live,
Yeah.
they're going to pause.
For
But
sure.
if it really is like, you know what, we just want to be done with this and we're good kind of monitoring the rates moving forward, maybe in 2023 or 2024, we refinance and save some money. Yeah, we're good with it. Let's do it.
Yep.
Those people are still in the market, and they'll be priced right. And some of these listings are priced totally wrong from day one. And to be honest, there's a few that get priced. The homeowner is setting the price. And
Yeah.
in some cases, the realtor is like, yeah, no problem. I'll list it for you at your price, instead of giving the advice and saying, it's not going to work at that price. Like
Yeah.
you should be here instead. Here's why.
Yep.
And a lot of people don't listen to that. A lot of realtors are afraid to give that advice because they're afraid they'll just go with somebody else.
Yep.
But the homeowner's making the mistake because they're thinking, yeah, my neighbor, he sold his house. It took 7 hours to sell it last year. Yeah, totally different year last year. So you do have a little bit less in the way of demand because people are kind of shocked waiting for the market to crash, which it doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
So that holds demand back a little bit. You'll have somewhat in the way of less inventory because you're going to have people that get rate lock effect. They're not going to sell their house in this environment. They're like, yeah, I'm good. I'm just going to sit. Which always leads me to the question I ask somebody that's considering buying and they go, I'm going to wait till the market changes. I said, okay, let's say you bought 3 or 4 years ago, you have this much equity, do you sell? And most of the time they're like, no. I'm like, okay, well, what does it matter? Does it matter if it goes down 100 grand or goes up 100 grand? Like if you're not selling anyways, does it really matter? I mean, if your exit of that home is 15 years from now, that's what matters, not tomorrow, not 15 months.
Yeah.
And I think when you slow it down and you really kind of look at the overall picture, the motivation to do these purchases, you get a lot of clarity at that point. And we have so much access to information these days. We were talking, you and I were talking about this the other day.
Yeah.
This will be a fun one for everybody. If I wanted to know if this was back in the early 80s and I wanted to know what my neighbor's house sold for, I'd have to call the local broker and ask and wait a few days to hear back.
Yeah.
So you'd have to go to the other broker's office and go, hey, did you sell that one? I think you had that one in the market 6 months ago. What did it sell for? Nobody really knew.
No.
Or order an appraisal on it. Now on my lunch break, I can look and go, oh my gosh, my value went up $5,000 today. Great.
Today.
Way more access to information there, and the ability to go, oh, that house is worth this. Oh, the neighborhood looks like that. Oh, my house could be here.
Mhm.
People know the stuff a lot quicker. And so because of that, there's way more awareness. I think it really accelerates the idea of maybe what you could do with your home more so than you had opportunity wise back in the 80s. And I think because of that, it also is part of the reason that we're where we are at today, because you have a lot more people that are interested in the market.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have known about real estate, in those eras. You go back, if you're in your 20s and the 80s or something like that, are you really going to understand the opportunity in real estate?
Yeah.
Probably not. You probably had to buy one of those cassette tape courses and hear, oh my gosh, I didn't know you could do that in real estate.
Yeah.
You could figure it out really quick, YouTube and on, different website apps and stuff like that. I mean,
Yep.
You have access to the opportunities. You can see it.
Mhm.
You can see what your neighbor's house sold for and what they bought it for years prior and see the opportunity that they got.
Yeah.
That fuels the desire to own real estate a lot more than it used to.
For sure. And that's what's caused a lot of the suburban markets to explode like in the 80s, you couldn't find out like, hey, if I wanted to live in California and my budget was X, like where would I live? Like, dude,
Yeah.
good luck. I don't even know where you would start that without the internet.
Yeah, you're in
Like, do you start
Palmdale, you want
calling
to,
like newspapers? Like, I don't know. But now you go on any of the public websites and put in your search criteria and, put your max price, and then you can say what state. And then all of a sudden, you're like, with a heat map, basically, like you'll see where all the pens are. You'll know, like, oh, I can afford Palmdale. Cool. Where is Palmdale? You know what I
right.
mean?
And that happens all the time. We had a gal the other night that reached out really for probably below the bottom of the market. I mean, just unfortunately, she's at a place where payment has to be incredibly low, which yields a massively undervalued sales price, which can't be touched even in Palmdale, Lancaster.
Yeah.
And so we were explaining that to her, telling her, here's the numbers. Yes, you do approve. And yes, you could get this kind of loan and this will be your payment. However, I don't think you're going to find anything, just to be totally honest with you. And it was about 3 hours later, she's like, oh, hey, what about this area? Like, well, yeah. She goes, can you lend there? I can. Like,
Yeah.
I haven't even ever been there. I don't,
Yeah.
people still live there. But, there's areas that she's just all of a sudden found them. And she found them in a few hours by just searching around on her website,
Yep.
Or her app or whatever she was using to kind of figure out like, okay, no more than X, what's available, and did a national search, and she started to kind of narrow it down like, okay, I still want to be in California.
Yep.
Still want to be in Southern California. I have to be here.
Yep. And has the power to do that now where you didn't before. And that's what allows our markets to continue to move and change.
Yep.
So it's interesting. It's fun. It's different. Keeps us on our toes. Yeah. Not every day is the same.
Yeah, but there's so many variables, to a family situation, whether they own now or they already, or they want to buy and that maybe they're renting. That's the spot where you have to talk to somebody that's either in lending or is a realtor. You have to make that conversation because we know really how to kind of guide them through it and say, not a good move, or no, that won't work, or yes, you're on the right track here. Left to those amazing, widgets and apps and everything else that we have access to, and left to your own devices to determine if it's going to work or not. And we've seen people figure out like, I don't qualify off of one of the apps, and then just by chance run into them and have a conversation. Go, what do you mean you don't qualify? Well, the app said I didn't qualify. It's like, no, you're fine. You got to do this, this, and this instead. I didn't know that. Well, yeah, because that's what we're here for. So. Those other tools are amazing. Once you kind of know your range, then plug your range that somebody's helped you come up with into those tools, and they become really, really effective. But they can be very misguiding sometimes if you're kind of following your own. It's like if you were going to go invest in the stock market and you knew nothing about it, you just blindly find things to invest in. But talking to somebody who's been doing it for a long time, has had success, will probably be able to tell you, no, don't go that route. Put your money here first. Like they can just redirect you a little bit. Same thing in real estate.
For sure.
And there's literally opportunity in every market. This market being challenging for sure, but there's still a ton of opportunity here. And depending on your time horizon, your unique situation could be a terrible time for you, and it could be a really good time for you. So that's the stuff that's kind of fun every day.
Yeah, it's per person in the same market.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, literally the same market, two different people, two different opportunities.
For sure.
And two different answers. One's yes, one's no. Sometimes no, 6 months from now. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff that comes out of those calls.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. All righty, sir. Any departing thoughts before we get on with the rest of the day?
No, I think that's it.
All righty.
Yeah, let us know if there's any questions or anything. Address some specific stuff. It's always kind of fun.
Yeah, no, I don't see anything yet. But if you guys have questions, or you want to set up a one-on-one conversation to just kind of go over some stuff, or you want more information on anything we said, how to get a hold of us, and we'd be happy to help you as always.
There you go. All right. Thanks, guys. Have a good weekend.